Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Write to Publish with me, Karen Stanley. It's great to have you here with us, and of course this is the podcast where we're going to have a look at the craft of writing, share some tips, and build a community of passionate storytellers, of which you are one. So today we're talking about something that every writer faces, and that is revision. It's something that we have to do, something that we don't necessarily want to do, but it's a necessary evil, should I say. So maybe you've got to the point where you've finished your first draft. First of all, congratulations for that. But the real magic is going to happen in the editing. And unfortunately, although that's tedious, it's the only thing that's going to take your first draft from okay to great and make your book ready for publication. You cannot publish your book without editing it unless you want to commit sort of writing travesty. It's going to discredit you faster than anything if you put out a book that is poorly edited. So how are you going to know when to cut sections, when to add detail? How are you going to revise your story arc and make sure there's no plot holes? And we're going to talk about other things such as, beta readers, some editing tips, and when you need to get professional help, because you are probably going to need a professional editor at some stage of the game. But it might be that you can clean your manuscript up sufficiently before you do that, not only to cut down on costs, but also to make sure that it's in a place that you're happy to share it with an editor and that they can give you the best advice based on the best version of your manuscript. If you send them a manuscript that's really dirty, as in it's got loads of errors, you haven't even read it through, you haven't made any effort to edit it at all, then of course they're going to get maybe a skewed version or vision of you as a writer and what you're capable of. So let's have a little look at what we're going to talk about today. So as I said, the first things first, the revision is where your story will truly come to life. And the first draft is really just you telling yourself the story. You're just blurting it out. I tell my readers, writers all the time, let go of perfection, let creativity flow, let the story come. So when you're putting down your first draft, understandably, there's going to be a lot of errors, some repetition maybe. It's not going to be in its kind of polished state, but it's you getting that story down. So now you're going to get to the point where you're going to refine it, you're going to sharpen it, and you're going to make it the best it can be. So think about your mindset here. You have to be quite courageous. You have to have strong shoulders. You have to be prepared to take criticism. You have to be kind of self-critical in a way, but in a way that's constructive, and you also have to be honest with yourself. It's can be quite an emotionally raw process. So your revision isn't just about fixing your mistakes, it's about shaping your book into its final form. And there is a school of thought that says great books aren't written, they're rewritten, which I kind of love that. So one of my top tips here would be to give yourself a bit of distance before you start the revision. Sometimes you're going to need a week or two away from your draft, and then you will hopefully see it with fresh eyes. Sometimes when you're in the thick of it, it can be hard to be objective. You'll be more subjective, and that can kind of cloud your view. So let's talk about cutting and expanding. And this is probably one of the hardest bits. Knowing what to cut and what to expand can be really, really tricky. So things that you need to cut. If there is a scene in your book that doesn't advance the plot or develop the characters, then it's got to go. So if you've got, and I've talked about this a lot, if you've got unnecessary detail in there, if you've got unnecessary kind of explanations or descriptions, it's going to slow the story down, it's going to slow up the pace, and it's just going to clutter up your story. So if there's something in there, it doesn't make the plot move forward, it doesn't drive the plot forward, and it doesn't develop the characters, then be honest, be brutal, get rid of it. And if you find yourself explaining things that the reader can infer, this might also be unnecessary. So, for example, a feeling or an emotion, or, if I talked about red leaves crunching underfoot, I wouldn't then need to tell the reader that it's autumn, because they've already inferred from that information. And this is kind of quite a bit of your show don't tell sort of tactics there. However, sometimes we're going to be wanting to create descriptive imagery because we want to create that internal imagery for the reader. So it's a bit of a fine line, but if you're over explaining things to the reader, then that might be unnecessary, and it will certainly affect the pace and clutter up your story. And if a section feels repetitive, tighten it up. You don't need to keep labouring your point. If you feel like you're repeating yourself, then that needs to be tightened. When to add detail, if a scene feels rushed, so this is on the flip side of cutting stuff, if it feels rushed, ask yourself if the reader has enough sensory details and emotions to connect. So, for example, I was helping one of my writers to edit their book, and they had a bit of a murder scene in their book, because their book was there was quite a tale going on whereby one of the characters had been found deceased. Now, she had, in some parts of her story, there was a lot of detail, but in this bit, I felt like she'd really cut to the chase quickly. I felt she'd really rushed that scene, and that was where I really wanted her to slow it down and add enough detail, because this was a real wow moment. A body had been found on the floor. It was a shock. Nobody had expected this to happen. So this was the exact point at which she could add more detail, and that would add something to the book rather than detracting from it. If a character's motivation isn't clear, then adding depth can make their actions more believable. So if the dialogue feels a little bit kind of too on the nose, a bit too straight to the point, try adding a little bit of subtext or actions that reveal a little bit more, that get the reader engaged and involved with your story. Try reading your manuscript aloud, and you'll instantly notice the bits that drag, or where the pace slows, or that feel unnatural or a little bit overly cluttered. So reading aloud is a really, really helpful way to fix any kind of plot errors. This next bit, revising your plan, fixing your plot holes. Even if you planned your story meticulously, revisions will often reveal weaknesses in your plot or your structure. And some common plot issues can be characters acting out of character for the sake of the plot. So, you want that integrity, you want that authenticity. There might be inconsistencies in your timeline or your setting, so make sure they don't suddenly change from one place to another when they should be somewhere else, or you've said it's next week when really only 2 days have passed, or a year, or thinking about that. A lack of stakes or tension. What we mean by this is create a reverse outline. So summarize each chapter in a sentence and see if everything logically connects. Okay, and if there's not enough tension, if there's not enough kind of high stakes, if there's no reason for characters to invest, then you need to think about your plot there. Now let's talk about beta readers. Once you've done your revisions, it's time for your beta readers. And it's really, really important that these are trusted readers who are going to give you honest feedback, but also who have the kind of authority to give you that feedback. There's no point giving your sci-fi book to someone who's passionate about romance. It's going to be difficult for them to give you constructive feedback when that's completely out of their genre. And make sure that you guide them. What is it that you want them to kind of critique for you? If you really are looking at plot holes and pacing in your plot, you don't really want them to be going through with a fine-tooth comb telling, well, you could have put a comma in there, you could have put a full stop in there. You want them to be looking at something different, and they can't look at everything all at once. So make sure you're very clear on what you want them to do. and then that will give them some focus and help them to be a bit more constructive. But these really need to be people that you trust and have the authority to give you such feedback. So pick people who enjoy your genre and who are willing to give constructive criticism. And I've said, provide them with guiding questions. So, for example, ask them questions about pacing, character believability, or clarity. You know, what is it that you want the beta reader to tell you about? And not all feedback needs to be applied. So if a few readers mention the same issue, then it might be time to say to yourself, right, I can't be too precious here. These are several readers, you know, independent readers have said the same thing. Maybe it's something I need to sit up and take notice of, because there must be some weight to their argument. If not everybody can be wrong. A friend of mine once said that. She actually said it about a boyfriend I had, but I think the same applies. Editing tips and when to hire professional help. So here we go. Even the best writers, as I've said, you know, need editors, but, you know, do self-edit as much as you can before you hire one. This will give you the chance to polish your manuscript as much as possible and will cut down on unnecessary costs on things that you could actually work yourself. You can use software like Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid to catch basic errors. It's got its place. I'm not a huge fan because it doesn't really understand colloquialisms or local language, and there will be times when it suggests corrections that might not actually apply. So it's a good first stop shop, but you need to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, and remember, it's a robot, it's not a person. So try reading your work backwards, sentence by sentence, to stop awkward phrasing. Not something I do, but some people say that's helpful. And again, think about, you know, what works for you may not necessarily work for another person. Change the font or print out your manuscript, which will trick your brain into seeing it differently. I definitely read better on paper than I do on screen, and I pick up much more errors that way. I know sometimes it's not always possible, but it can be a really helpful trick. And then hiring a professional really needs to happen if you're serious about publishing, whether it's traditional or self-publishing. Then that's time to hire a professional. If you've revised but you still feel a bit stuck, or if the beta reader points out major issues that you're unsure how to fix, that might be time for you to hire a professional. Developmental editors will help with big picture editing and storytelling, so looking for plot holes and storyline, story arc. And then copy editors will polish the language, and they will sort of be looking more at the grammar, the punctuation, the more the nitty gritties, the technical aspects of the writing. But you need to know what you need before you hire. So make sure you understand what it is you want, what you need, and then hire the correctors. Not every editor will do the same job. So I hope that's helped you today. Quite a shorter episode today. But do remember, revision's not about making your story perfect in one go. It's a back and forth process. You need to improve step by step by step by step. Sometimes it can feel a bit tedious. You might need to walk away, come back to it, but it's not a one and done type deal. You need to have patience and you need to commit to the process. You've got to improve it step by step. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please, as always, do get in touch, Karen at mabelandstanleypublishing.com. And I'd love to hear from you. You know, like, what's the hardest part of revision for you? Are you trying to do some editing and you feel completely stuck and not sure where to go next? Please, as I say, do get in touch, or maybe make a comment on some of my posts. This is lots of stuff I talk about on my social media channels at Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Please do comment on my videos or my posts and let me know how you're feeling and what your kind of hurdles or your challenges are currently. If you'd like to be part of a writing community, I do run a writing community because I feel it can be really useful and helpful for writers to be able to share tips, to get inspiration and motivation from each other. You also get access to me for any of your writing and publishing questions, which can be jolly helpful, particularly if you're starting out on your journey. And also, you know, when you come to the point of polishing your manuscript, we run a lovely community, really helpful people, really keen to give feedback, really keen to kind of share ideas and inspirations. And that can be invaluable for your writing journey and can make it a little bit less lonely. And you just really do learn from other people who've been in the same position as you are. So as I say, Karen at mavenandstanleypublishing.com. If you've got any questions or you want to get in touch, you know where to find me. I'm always happy to help. Thank you for listening in, and I'll see you all again soon.